We start off this hour in the state of Idaho, where Bryan Kohberger's defense team is pushing back and pushing back hard, let me tell you, against DNA evidence that allegedly places him at the scene of that quadruple homicide. Now, the state of Idaho has revealed through court documents that Bryan Kohberger is a statistical match to DNA recovered from the knife sheath found at the scene of the crime, saying in part, quote, "We already knew that Kohberger's father was linked to the knife sheath. The FBI further compared DNA from the sheath to a cheek swab of the defendant and determined it was a match." Now, Kohberger's attorneys are responding to the claims, accusing the state of Idaho of hiding its entire case. And there's more, and they're rejecting the notion that they are expected to just accept at face value that the sheath contained touch DNA belonging to Bryan Kohberger. So the defense team goes on to say, quote, "There's no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. There is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Kohberger's apartment, in his office, in his home, or his vehicle." There's no doubt this knife sheath is going to play a pivotal role, my Cordy friends, when this case goes to trial. The Gonsalves family attorney, Shannon Gray, who you've seen on Court TV before, spoke about this previously. He talked to us about the importance of the knife sheath to this entire case. Take a listen to what he said.
That was a pretty lengthy probable cause affidavit. It's one of the lengthiest ones I've ever seen. But I think they were very, they wanted to provide as much information as they could to establish probable cause in it. It laid out a little bit of the state's case, how they might proceed on the case at trial. But there's a lot of still other circumstantial evidence that will be gathered between now and the trial date. You still have 3 other crime scenes. You have his apartment, you have the car, you have his parents' house that all need to be processed for evidence of the crime, and then any other evidence that comes in between now and then. But the probable cause, I thought that, it was well done. I think the biggest piece of evidence that jumps out to you is the DNA evidence on the sheet. I think that's the one piece of evidence that will be hard to explain as a defense attorney on the case. So I think that's the biggest piece of evidence.
Okay, so Shannon Gray's reaction there. Let me bring in my guests on the program this morning and talk a little bit more about this. In Silver Spring, Maryland, trial attorney Michelle Thomas, and in Washington, D.C., trial attorney and the host of the podcast Mom Life and Law, Megan Whiteside. Good morning to you, ladies. Thanks for being on the show this Monday morning. Okay, first, let me get your quick reactions to what Kohberger's defense team is doing, saying, wait a minute, we're just supposed to accept the state's evidence. Why isn't there DNA anywhere else in the car, in the home, in his office, yada, yada, yada. Michelle Thomas, what do you think about what the defense is saying here, please?
Yeah, good morning, Julie. Good to be with you. So they're doing their job. Yes, they have to make the argument and push back at every possible turn, including DNA evidence. However, the argument is pretty baseless, and I expect it to go nowhere. DNA evidence on the knife sheath is certainly at the crux of the case in terms of linking this defendant to the crime. And so to expect to have that excluded or somehow allege that there's prejudice to the defendant is just really, really a stretch, Julie.
I appreciate it, Michelle. Megan Whiteside, same question to you. Your initial reaction hearing what the defense team is saying, please.
The defense is grasping at straws here because this is going to be the most compelling evidence, I imagine, to a jury in this trial. And what we can expect is that the state is going to argue that this goes to weight and not admissibility. That's a fancy way of saying the defense can attack this evidence through cross-examination of the DNA expert, by bringing their own DNA expert, but really the arguments they're making are not arguments that should persuade a judge to throw this evidence out.
I appreciate it, Megan. I'm just thinking to myself as I hear this, as you ladies so well said, yes, the defense team has to make these arguments. Yes, their concern is representing him, and depending on what the state moves for in terms of seeking the death penalty, this might become a case where they're working to just save his life. We'll see. So they've got to do all this or else they're going to be ineffective. You ladies know there's something, called ineffective assistance of counsel. These claims can be made if you don't make sure you leave no stone unturned, so to speak. And so they've got to attack it. However, when you think about it, and just logically, I'm not even talking as a lawyer, it's like, is Bryan Kohberger the unluckiest guy in the whole world that, you know, his car is seen at their house 12 times, there's messages sent via DM to some of these victims, he's wearing gloves when he's back at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. His DNA happens to be on the sheath at the crime scene between Maddie and Kaylee's bodies. Is he that unlucky? Did somebody take his knife sheath and just decide to drop it there to try to implicate him? Come on. Okay, and let's look at this here. This is from the state's motion, laying out the factual background here, one of their motions, but this was recent one, you know, regarding the DNA, the new developments. And they're talking about how, you know, that knife sheath, you know, is found on a bed next to the bodies of Maddie and Kaylee, best friends, roommates, sleeping in the same bed on that night that they were both murdered. The sheath, found face down, partially underneath Maddie's body, as well as the comforter on the bed. So that's where it was placed. Now, the defense team in their motion has said some other things. They're saying, quote, in part, lab analysts were aware of 2 additional males' DNA within the house where the deceased were located, and another unknown male's DNA on a glove found outside the residence. Further, these 3 separate and distinct male DNA profiles were not identified through CODIS, that's the big national system where you can do legal comparisons, leading to the conclusion that the profiles do not belong to Mr. Kohberger. Okay, so Michelle Thomas, knowing that this house is a party house, that was one of the biggest things we talked about at the outset, how tough it's going to be to sort through that DNA. Knowing that, what do you think when you read the paragraph we just showed about what the defense team is saying? Other men's DNA is around and you guys aren't looking at it. Why do you think that is, that the state isn't focused on it?
Yeah, because there's too much other circumstantial evidence that points in the direction of Mr. Kohberger. So it doesn't explain, to your point, why his car was outside of their home at least 12 times near the time of the crime. The behaviors we saw him on video, having been stopped by the cop those 2 additional times, the searches that occurred at their home in Pennsylvania. And I mean, there's just too much here that links this particular defendant. And so the state is not going to go down this rabbit hole that the defense would have them and this alternative culprit theory, because it really doesn't make any sense. His DNA was on the knife sheath. The knife was used as part of the crime. And so all roads still point in the direction of Mr. Kohberger.
Right, Michelle. I mean, the driving of the car, you know, to me, that's like some of the most damaging evidence. They're concerned about the DNA. Megan Whiteside, how about how they've got him? They've got his route all mapped out, you know, how he goes to the house, middle of the night. He's there in the window that these homicides were committed, according to his car's, you know, the black box in there that has the GPS, and they show the route he goes all around, maybe to dispose of the knife. I don't know. Prosecutor's going to say it. Megan, what do you think about the defense saying that, you didn't look at this other male DNA?
The defense's job is to find an argument and some evidence to back it up that can go to support reasonable doubt. The standard in a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the defense has got to do their best to try to create some argument that the jury would be convinced, okay, this is reasonable doubt. The government did not investigate these other sources of DNA. But I think what you pointed to in terms of this is a house next to a college campus. They have parties there. We would expect to find multiple DNA sources from individuals not living within the home. That's just to be expected. And really a coincidence upon a coincidence upon a coincidence for Mr. Kohberger is no coincidence here. I think the government has a really strong case.
Perfect note to end on. Megan Whiteside, thank you for that. Yeah, this guy, he's the unluckiest guy in the world, isn't he? All this just happening to him. We're going to continue talking about this. By the way, Kohberger's got a big hearing on Tuesday. Some of these motions are going to be hashed out. We're, of course, going to be there for that hearing. We're going to talk more about it. The cameras still allowed in at this point. So very good thing for all of you who've been wondering. You know, Kohberger wants to keep him out. Of course, Court TV wants him in so we can bring you this trial.